Welcome to the CSS Essential Training Series. I'm Mike King, your instructor, and in this tutorial we're going to look at the default CSS stylings. Browser stylings and what are the defaults. Let's look at a typical HTML document and see the default settings that a browser adds to the document as it sets that document up for display in your browser window. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into our development environment and let's look at a typical HTML document. Alright, so let's go ahead and minimize our presentation. Let's get into our development environment. The first thing we want to do, as we do in most of our tutorials, is confirm that our Apache WAMP server is up and running. You'll notice I've got my Apache server running with my MySQL and PHP. It is running in the background. The next thing I want to do, let's go ahead and minimize that screen. Let's make certain we've got our text editor up and going. I'm going to be using Sublime Text 2 in this demonstration, as I do in most of my demonstrations. I'm also going to use two web browsers in this demonstration just so that you can see comparisons between the two. I've got my Firefox web browser loaded, and I'm also going to be using Safari in this demonstration, so you'll actually see both those web browsers interchanged amongst themselves as they come up and down. What I want to do now is I want to go ahead to my example file, and I'm going to load our example document that we're going to use for the demonstration. It is in the example file under exercise 1. I'm going to go ahead and copy that. I'm going to open up a new document in my text editor. Let's go ahead and paste that in. And I'm going to go ahead and save that document. And hang on one second, I'll give you guys an opportunity to copy that if you don't have access to the exercise files. I'm going to go ahead and save that in the root directory of my web server. So I'm going to go down and bring up my web development server, and I'm going to go in my CSS tutorials inside my styling tutorial, and we're going to name this. I want to name this CSS styling _1. So it's CSS _ styling _01, and it's going to be a .html file. And again, that's in the root directory of my Apache server. When I refresh the browser window, you should see it come up right there, which it does. Let's go ahead and bring that up in the browser. So you can see we've just got a variety of different things inside this HTML document so that you can see what's going on with our styling. Let's go on over here to our text editor. I'm going to go ahead and make sure my word wrap is on. I'm going to go ahead and expand this text editor a little bit so we can get more of this on our screen, so that as you're typing it, now would be a great time to pause if you need to pause, so you can type in that top portion. Then let's go ahead and scroll down. Now would be a great time to pause if you need to type in the remainder. And we probably have one or two more. Now I'm going to scroll down a little bit further. See if you can get the rest of that stuff. There you go. Now would be a good time to pause if you need to go ahead and type in the remainder of the document. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and resize all my screens, put everything back the way it was. So we're back into our development environment. And the first thing I want to point out, first off, keep in mind that we're in the Firefox browser. So the first thing I want to point out is let's look at the browser, how it's adding its own formatting to the page. And what I mean by that is if you look, let me scroll back up to the top of our document. You'll notice I've got some H1 tags, I've got some paragraphs, I've got a couple different div IDs in there, I got some link tags, and you'll see that the H1's are big. The let's see, where's my H4 tag below that is a lot smaller. It's adding different types of formatting to my links, which is these aref, or my anchor tags. You notice I've got some different formatting here on this H2 element. Then my paragraphs look to be a different type of formatting. Then when I get down inside my unordered list and my ordered list, you'll notice the unordered list has bullets, the ordered list has numbers, my footer is very small because it's an H5. So there's a lot of built-in formatting that's default into our browsers. So if I go in and I look at the options that are set for this browser, you can see that the browser itself has a default font. It's got a default font of Times Roman at size 14. And that's what we can set up as the user of the browser. If I look at Safari, you'll notice it's very similar in the way that it displays that page. There's a little bit of difference in the font size, a little bit of difference in the spacing between the paragraphs if you look back and forth. It looks like here I've got a little bit more line spacing than I do inside Firefox. Safari has a little bit more spacing in between the paragraph lines. The bullets are a little bit different size. My default font appears to be a different size. So you can see that we actually have a little bit of differences between the two browsers themselves. I'm going to go ahead and bring up my Safari browser once again. So let's go in and look at, if I go in to my Firefox browser, let's go into that Firefox browser, let's go under Tools and go to Options. You notice that as a user, I can make some changes. I can actually change the font size as a user. And that changes the font size across my entire document. Let me go ahead and put this back down. So it's back down to the size it should be. That changes the font size across my entire document. The same thing under Tools, I can go under here and I can actually go into the advanced settings and I can change colors, font size, how it views the types of proportional fonts, what it uses as a serif font, a non-serif font. All that stuff can be set up by the user. So we want to be careful and we want to keep that stuff in mind as we're designing our documents, because we're going to be overwriting those particular settings. So browsers have these settings for the users, and they need to keep in mind that when we're designing our web pages. Some of our users may require a larger font in order to see what they need to see on that browser screen. So remember, when you're writing your own styles, you're overwriting the default styles of the browser. Keep in mind and remember that based on those defaults, if you do not consider them, you may get some unexpected results. So we have ways of dealing with that. Dealing with default styles has caused designers to develop a way of handling the defaults from the onset. And we actually talked about this, if you remember some of the earlier tutorials. If you've gone through some of my HTML tutorials, you've heard me talk about CSS Resets. So that's what we're going to look at. A CSS Reset is a group of styles that are placed at the beginning of a style sheet to zero out the default browser formatting. These CSS Resets can be very complex or very simple depending upon the author and what you're looking for in particular as you do your CSS Resets. For our tutorial series, to ensure consistency with our display, we're going to use the CSS Reset, and it's one that's it's a cross between complex and simplistic. It's kind of in the middle. I've actually designed a couple of CSS Resets that I use myself, and they're kind of in the middle. They're not real simplistic. I mean, they cover most of my tags, they cover my margins and my paddings, they cover most of my lists, they cover most of the anchors, but they're not so complex that they cover everything that's on the page. And I keep that in mind as I'm writing them. But anyway, this will keep our stuff, it'll keep all of our formatting consistent as we format our pages. There are a lot of available sites for learning about CSS Resets. So I'm going to drop back into the presentation for a minute because I want to show you some places where you can go to learn about these CSS Resets. So let's look at a couple of these CSS Resets that we've talked about. The first one is CSSReset.com. And it has the most popular CSS Resets that are out there. And in a minute, we're actually going to go visit these sites. We're going to go actually look at the sites live. But this is a really good one because you'll notice, first off, there's quite a few different resets on the site. And the level of complexity is different for each one. And you can actually tell that by the size of the file. If you look at the normalized CSS version 1, it's only 3,000 bytes. And as you work your way up, like the Universal Selector Reset, 7,000 bytes. When you get up to Eric Meyer's reset, which is 2.0, his version 2, it's almost 30K. So, I mean, that's a very complex reset. We'll look at it in a minute. There's another good site that I like to use, and that's the Perishable Press site, the killer collection of CSS Resets. He's got a big variety of CSS Resets on this site, and we're going to visit this site also in a moment. But not only does he have many different types of CSS Resets, but he explains what those different types of resets are for. So let's go look at the sites really quick as we wrap up this portion of the tutorial. Alright, so as we discussed in the presentation, here's the first site that we looked at, CSSReset.com. And he actually has 5 really good resets, a little bit of documentation on the different types. But you can actually click on, for instance, click on the Eric Meyer's code, and it'll actually bring up that CSS Reset. You can copy this file, you can get some documentation to it, or you can move it directly into your CSS styling sheet. And we're actually going to have one, so we're not going to copy these. I just wanted you to see the differences in some of these sets. By the way, he has a minified version and he has the full version. The minified version, for anyone that's not aware what minified means, and you'll see that a lot as you get into web developing, it's actually this file, this exact same file with no white space. So everything is technically one line. Very difficult to read, very difficult to modify, but it makes it very quick to read in your browser. And he's got a couple different ones here. One of the other ones he has is normalized CSS. This is a very simple CSS reset. One thing you'll notice here, and one thing you want to keep in mind as you're looking through the CSS resets, especially as we're working with the HTML5 scripting language, you'll want to make certain your CSS reset is adaptable or has already been adapted for HTML5. And the reason I say that is we've got new tags in HTML5. Remember, we've got that aside tag that you see right here. We have the section tag, the article tag, the navigation tag. You're going to want to make certain that those tags, the new video, canvas, and audio tags, are part of your CSS reset. Because if they're not, if you're using an older version reset and you start using some of those new elements in your website, the new HTML elements, and obviously the new browsers are going to have default settings for those elements, you're going to get some unpredictable results as you use them. One of the other sites I wanted to look at, and again, this is CSSReset.com, a really good site. Let's go look at the other site we talked about in our presentation. That's Perishable Press. And I actually like Perishable Press because he's got a lot of good information on resets. You can actually come through here and read about CSS resets. And the farther down you go, he comes in with what's called the Minimalistic Reset, version 1. This is the bare bones reset. All I'm resetting is I'm universally resetting the padding and universally resetting the margin. Nothing else. And in version 2, now I'm doing paddings, margin, and border. And this, by the way, is the universal selector in CSS. In version 3, we're doing outline, padding, margin, and border. And he just goes down and slowly adds to these different types of resets. He's got a bunch of different resets in here. Some of these are similar to ones that I've used before on my site, some of my sites. Really good site if you're trying to learn what CSS resetting is all about. Because, I mean, it starts you at the bare bones, absolutely nothing, pretty much nothing, and it walks you through all the way to the end where you've got a relatively complex reset. Let's go on down here to one of his further ones down the line. And by the way, you'll notice he has Eric Myers, the site we were just on. He actually has his reset in here also. And Eric, if I'm not mistaken, you notice I don't see any tag elements in here for HTML5, so this one has not been upgraded yet to support HTML5. So be really careful when you select your reset. If it hasn't been updated for HTML5, you need to update it for HTML5. You need to make sure that you get those tag elements in there for HTML5, or else you're going to get some unexpected results as you use those new elements across your system. But again, very good site, a lot of good information on CSS resets and how they're used. Alright, so let's go ahead and wrap this tutorial up by actually implementing our CSS reset that we're going to use throughout this training tutorial series so that you'll see how it does impact the different browsers. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this presentation. You'll notice we're still back into our HTML document. I do want to point out a couple things that I changed so you can update your document as well. If you've got the exercise files, these will already have been in the exercise files updated. But the first thing I want you to notice is under the link, I've actually added a directory _CSS with a / base.css, and we'll discuss that file in a minute, but that's the file that we're going to use as our base CSS file. So you'll need to update your document for that link and that file name. And I've also added a horizontal row right below my navigation. You'll notice this horizontal line that we've got going across the screen. I tend to use those in my documents, so I figured, you know what, let's add one to this base document as we're going through this, because that is something I tend to style with CSS. So I added that into the sheet also. Very cool. Okay, so you've got caught up with there. We've got our base document up. You'll notice I still have my two browsers going. I still have my Safari browser and my Firefox browser that are both running. Now what I want to do is I want to create a new file. So in your text editor, I want you to go ahead and select a new file. That should bring us a brand new blank document. And before we even do that, let's go into the directory structure of our web directory, because you'll notice now I'm in the root of our web browser, or our web server. I want to create a new folder in that root directory, and I want to call it _CSS. And a lot of people ask me why I use the underscores. I actually do this on a lot of my live sites also. And the reason being is it brings my directories to the top of the listing. I mean, I don't know if for anyone that's never done a website, I mean, sometimes when you get these sites done, in fact, most of the time, you'll have hundreds or thousands of files in the root of your site. So I tend to put underscores in my primary directories, like my CSS directory, my scripts directory, my layouts directory, so that they go to the top of that list. So as I'm updating or as I'm moving things around on the site structure itself, my primary directories are easy to find. And they tend to be, like I said, my CSS directories are primary, my scripts directories are primary, where I put a lot of my PHP files, a lot of my JavaScript. I'll actually have a layouts directory where I'll actually put template pages and my images folder. So I tend to use the underscore. So in your root directory of your structure, please put underscore CSS, because that's where we're going to save our CSS files, our style sheet files. Let's go ahead and minimize that directory window. Now what I want to do is in the exercise folder, if you have availability to the exercise files, you will see under example 2 CSS Reset. I want you to go ahead and copy that and paste that into this nice blank page that we have. And don't be alarmed if you don't have access to the exercise files, because I'm going to pause this so you can have time to type it in. I'm going to do a save as on this file. I want to save it in that underscore CSS directory we just created, and I want to call this base.css. And I want you to save that file. And now let me go ahead and expand the text editor. Make sure my word wrap is on so that you can have an opportunity to type this in. And now would be a great time to pause the video for you to type in this portion of the display. Let me go ahead and scroll down. And again, an opportunity for you to pause the video and type in this portion if you don't have access to those exercise files. And I'm going to scroll down the rest of the way and again type in the remaining portion of this file. This is our CSS Reset file. I'm going to go ahead and put my window back to its size for my development environment. Let's talk real quickly about what this is. First thing I want you to notice, I've got my version numbers and on target HTML5 and all that stuff. This is the stuff standard stuff I put at the top of most of my files. Then what I've done is I've identified the majority of the HTML tags that I use inside of my documents, inside of my HTML documents, which is a good majority of all the tags. And you'll notice on this one, this is a new version of my CSS Reset set up for HTML5. You'll notice I've got the section element, the canvas element, the article element, the nav element, audio, the video. So all the new tags that are available in HTML5 are now part of the CSS Reset. What I'm doing here is I'm removing all the margins, the paddings, the borders, the outlines. I'm setting a standard font size across my entire document of font size 1M, and we'll talk about these different sizes in later tutorials. I'm setting my vertical alignment as baseline and my background being transparent. I'm coming down, and in the body element, I'm setting my line height at 1. And again, as we get farther into the CSS files, you'll understand, into the CSS tutorials, you'll understand what a lot of these settings do. Then I come down and I take my article, my asides, my details, my fig caption, my figures, my footers, my headers, my H groups, my menus, my navs, and my sections, and I'm displaying them as a block. And as we get into the development of the CSS files, you'll understand why I'm doing this. But in a nutshell, this makes it a lot easier as I'm floating and positioning things on my screen if they display as block. Remember, we have two different types of elements in HTML. We have inline elements and block level elements. If you went through the HTML tutorials, we actually have tutorials on both of those, and you'll understand what the difference is between inline and block level. Well, we're taking these inline elements and we're displaying them as block level elements. Then I come down and put my nav, my ULs, if I've got a nav tag with the UL inside. In other words, if I've got a navigation set up, I want the list style to be none. Then I format block quotes with quotes none. I format my anchor tags with no margins, no paddings. I set the font size, my vertical alignment, my background colors. Then I set up my table formatting, and then I get into this horizontal line, display it as a block, how big it is, the borders and all that. Then the input selects vertical alignment and middle. So this is what I use as my CSS Reset. I use this on the majority of my sites. This is what we're going to use for our tutorial exercise. Normally what I'll do is right at the bottom of this, I'll come down here and I'll add a comment, CSS Reset ends. And I'll comment that out so that I know where the reset itself ends inside my CSS file. And let me explain something to you why I call this base.css. As we walk through the tutorial exercises, you're going to see that I do something that's I think is kind of unique. I don't see too many people do it, too many web developers do it, but I have found that it makes it a lot easier for me when I'm actually designing my websites. I actually have a base CSS file which sets up the base of all my pages. Then I actually have a main CSS file where I actually go in and do a lot of the styling for those particular pages. And then as I get some offshoots, as I have particular pages that are a little bit different than the rest of the site, they'll actually have their own CSS file. And one of the beauties about cascading style sheets is the cascading effect. If I have my base and then my main and then whatever particular style sheet I need for a particular page and they fall in that order, everything cascades down to those lower orders. So by the time I get down to those particular pages that use just a few differences, I just need styles for the differences because it's actually picked up everything above it. So it's actually very cool. It's something that I've been doing it for years. I don't see it done a lot, but I think it makes it a lot easier to maintain my sites. All right, I'm going to go ahead and save that file. Let's make sure that we've saved our styling file. And before we refresh our browser windows, I want you to pay attention to what we're seeing right now in Firefox and what we're seeing right now in Safari. Because when I refresh these browser windows, based on the fact that we've linked this style sheet, we've now linked that CSS Reset to these pages, all the default settings inside the browsers are going to go away. So let's start out with Safari. Let's go ahead and refresh that browser window, and you'll notice all the default settings are gone. That's what it looks like without any default settings inside Safari. And let's go back and look at Firefox. Again, refreshing the browser window. That's what Firefox looks like without any of the default settings. And now we've got a great starting point as we start to learn how to use CSS to style our web pages. So I hope you learned a lot in this tutorial. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.